The clock reads 2:14 a.m., glowing faint blue in an otherwise dark room. You didn't set an alarm for this. Nothing outside made a sound. You were asleep 20 minutes ago, and now you're just not. Lying there, breathing, wide awake, doing the math you don't want to do. If I fall asleep right now, I still get 4 hours and 37 minutes. You've probably decided this means something is wrong with you. Insomnia, stress, bad sleep hygiene, take your pick. Here's the twist. If a sleep scientist were watching your brain right now, they wouldn't be worried. They might not even react. Because what you're calling a disorder used to be called Tuesday. For most of human history, waking up in the dead of night wasn't a malfunction. It was just what a normal night felt like, for basically everyone, for thousands of years. We didn't lose that pattern because our biology changed. We lost it because somebody changed the rules on us, fairly recently, without ever telling us. So let's find out who. To understand why people used to wake up at night on purpose, you need to understand how genuinely dangerous night used to be, because that's where the whole story starts. Not forgot to charge my phone dark. Total darkness. No streetlights, no glowing screens, no ambient city glow leaking through a curtain. If clouds covered the moon, you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Biologically, that was a serious problem because we are built for daylight. Our night vision is mediocre next to a wolf, a leopard, or anything else that might have fancied us for dinner. The moment the sun went down, we stopped being the smartest thing around and started being the easiest thing to catch. So our ancestors did the one thing that changed everything. They controlled fire. Not just for cooking, as a wall. A glowing boundary predators wouldn't cross, carving a small circle of safety into a hostile dark. And that circle of safety is exactly where our story picks up, because it's also where the two-part night began. Anthropologist Polly Wiessner spent years studying the hoansi people of southern Africa. And she did something simple. She recorded what people actually talked about, by day versus by firelight at night. By day, conversation was almost entirely business. About a third of it was practical, hunting and gathering logistics, and roughly another third was complaints, criticism, and gossip, the unglamorous glue that keeps a small group from falling apart. Jokes made up a decent chunk too. Stories, though, the thing you'd think people would want to talk about, barely showed up at all. Then the sun went down, and the numbers didn't just shift, they flipped. By firelight, over 4/5 of conversation was storytelling. Gossip nearly vanished. Business talk practically disappeared. Wiessner's read was simple. Daytime is for keeping the group running. Nighttime is when people finally exhale. That firelit window was the original off switch for stress. And when the fire eventually burned low and people lay down to sleep, they weren't actually done with the night yet. Not even close. This next part comes from historian Roger Ekirch, who spent over a decade combing through diaries, court records, medical texts, and literature from before the industrial era, and found something hiding in plain sight the whole time. People didn't sleep in one block, they slept in two. Shortly after dark, people went to bed and fell into what they called their first sleep, a deep, solid stretch of roughly 4 hours. Then, somewhere around midnight, they woke up. Not with alarm, not with panic. It was as unremarkable as expecting to get hungry around lunchtime. That waking window lasted an hour, sometimes two. In parts of Europe, it even had a name, the watch. And it wasn't wasted time. People prayed, journaled by candlelight, quietly talked with a spouse, tended the fire, or just lay there thinking. Some got up to check on animals or slip out to see a neighbor. It's described so casually, so repeatedly, across so many centuries and countries that nobody at the time bothered to explain it, the same way nobody explains what breakfast is. Then, without any effort, the tiredness would return, and people would drift into a second sleep that carried them to morning. Which raises the obvious question. Was this just a habit? Something people did because candles were expensive and there wasn't much else going on at midnight? Or is there something in our actual biology that still wants this exact pattern? In the early 1990s, psychiatrist Thomas Wehr ran an experiment that still gets cited decades later as one of the quietly wildest studies in sleep science. He took a group of ordinary, modern, artificially lit adults and put them somewhere with 14 hours of darkness a night for a month, roughly what a winter night looked like before electricity. No clocks to obey, no schedules to keep, just darkness. At first, their sleep was a mess, long, heavy, disorganized, which makes sense given how much sleep debt most modern people are quietly carrying around. But within a few weeks, something remarkable happened. Without being told to, every subject settled into 2 distinct sleep periods of about 4 hours each, separated by a stretch of calm, quiet wakefulness in the middle. Nobody trained them to do this. Nobody in that lab had read Roger Ekirch's diaries. Their bodies just remembered, on their own, as if the pattern had never actually left, just been buried under a few centuries of artificial light. And that wakeful stretch in the middle wasn't groggy or miserable. Researchers found elevated levels of prolactin during it, a hormone linked to calm, contented states, which may help explain why the old watch reportedly felt peaceful rather than stressful. Which raises a strange possibility. The modern 2 a.m. panic and the ancient midnight watch might be the exact same biological event, just interpreted 2 completely different ways, centuries apart. So if this is sitting quietly in our biology, ready to resurface the second the lights go out, what turned the lights on in the first place? 2 things did it, and neither one had anything to do with health advice. The first is hiding in a word you already know: curfew. It comes from the Old French couvre-feu, literally cover the fire. In crowded medieval towns built almost entirely from wood, an unattended hearth fire was a citywide catastrophe waiting to happen. So, a bell rang each night, and by law, every household had to smother their fire. No flame meant no light, and no light meant the watch quietly lost its warmth, its glow, and eventually its reason to exist. The second, bigger blow came later. In 1667, Paris became one of the first cities in the world to systematically light its streets after dark. For the first time in human history, night stopped being something you simply endured and became something you could use. Taverns stayed open. People walked the streets. The night was, quite literally, open for business. Then the Industrial Revolution made that shift permanent. Factories didn't run on sunrise and sunset. They ran on a clock bolted to the wall. Workers needed to be at the same machine at the same hour every single morning. Bedtimes crept later because now there was finally something to do after dark, but wake times stayed locked to the factory whistle. You can guess what got squeezed out of the middle. That quiet hour had nowhere left to fit, so it got compressed, flattened, and eventually erased. Until one unbroken 8-hour block wasn't just common, it became the only acceptable version of a good night's sleep. Within a couple of generations, almost nobody remembered there had ever been another way. Here's the part that actually matters for you at 2:14 in the morning. Once we decided sleep was supposed to be one unbroken block, waking up in the middle of the night stopped being neutral. It became evidence. Evidence that something was wrong with you. And that belief alone is what turns an ordinary biological pause into a genuine problem. The moment you decide, I shouldn't be awake right now, your body agrees with you, and not in a helpful way. It reads the situation as a threat and releases stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, chemicals that are excellent at keeping you alert and terrible at letting you fall back asleep. The very response meant to protect you in an emergency ends up manufacturing the emergency. So the calm, prolactin-soaked watch our ancestors knew gets replaced by a wired, anxious hour of clock-checking and catastrophizing. Same wake-up, completely different experience, because we handed it a completely different meaning. If you want proof this isn't just historical trivia, there's a study from 2013 worth knowing. Researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder took a small group of ordinary, sleep-deprived, artificially lit adults camping for a week. No phones, no flashlights, nothing but sunlight and a campfire. Within days, their internal clocks shifted by roughly 2 hours, realigning almost perfectly with actual sunrise and sunset. People who'd normally call themselves night owls and people who'd call themselves early birds, differences that usually feel like fixed personality traits, mostly disappeared. Natural light turned out to be a stronger signal than anyone's type. It took 1 week outdoors to partially undo years of artificial light exposure, which tells you something important about what's actually going on with you at 2 a.m. It's not a broken system that needs fixing. It's a natural system that's been overridden, and it's still very much waiting underneath. So here's where that leaves you. Wide awake, staring at the ceiling. What's happening isn't a malfunction. It's your body attempting something it's done for most of human history, in a world that no longer has any patience for it. You don't need an app for this, and you don't need a pill. Next time it happens, don't reach for your phone, and don't start doing sleep math. Let yourself just be awake for a few minutes. If your mind is racing, keep a notepad by the bed and write it down, the way people once wrote by candlelight. If you're restless, sit up in the dark rather than fight it lying down. Treat it as a pause, not an emergency, because that's the only real difference left between the watch and insomnia. The story you tell yourself while it's happening. Eventually, the tiredness will return on its own, the same way it did for every human before electricity existed. You won't have to force it. You'll just sink back into a second sleep, the way people have been doing for most of the time our species has existed, long before anyone thought to be afraid of it. You're not broken. You're just remembering.